August 15, 1971. While Americans watched television, a secret meeting at Camp David sealed the world's financial fate. President Nixon declared the dollar as good as gold, but behind closed doors, the United States had quietly defaulted, severing its global promise. Why did America break its word, and what price did the world pay for this hidden betrayal? The true story of money's greatest cover-up begins here. In July 1944, delegates from 44 nations gathered in the quiet hills of New Hampshire to build a new world order out of the wreckage of war. The agreement they signed at Bretton Woods created a simple, sacred promise. Every United States dollar would be worth exactly $35 per ounce of gold. The United States pledged that any foreign government could exchange their dollars for gold at that fixed rate. No questions asked. It was more than a policy. It was a guarantee that turned the dollar into the anchor of the global economy. At that moment, America's vaults brimmed with gold. The United States held more than 574 million ounces, over half the world's official reserves. No other country came close. The world's currencies were pegged to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold. This was the foundation of trust. French and British officials called it the gold exchange standard, but to the rest of the world, the dollar became as reliable as gold itself. This arrangement fueled a wave of post-war prosperity. Dollars flowed across borders, rebuilding Europe and Japan, financing trade, and investing in new industries. The United States Treasury printed bills, but the promise behind each one was clear: a piece of Fort Knox, guaranteed by the American government. For decades, no one doubted the pledge. The numbers seemed unbreakable. The world believed the gold would always be there, and that the United States would always honor its word. By the mid-1960s, the numbers behind America's gold promise began to unravel. In 1966, foreign governments and central banks held $14 billion in U.S. claims, paper bills and deposits that, by the Bretton Woods Agreement, could be turned in for gold at any time. But the Treasury's vaults held only $13.2 billion worth of gold at the official price. For the first time, the world's claims on American gold were larger than the gold itself. The arithmetic was undeniable. If every foreign holder asked for redemption, the United States would come up short. Economist Barry Eichengreen captured the absurdity. It cost just a few cents for the Bureau of Engraving and Printing to produce a $100 bill, but other countries had to trade $100 worth of real goods to get one. This imbalance gave the U.S. what French officials called the exorbitant privilege, the power to buy the world's products with paper while others paid in hard value. American leaders spent freely, funding the Vietnam War and new social programs, confident that the dollar's gold anchor would hold. But as the mismatch widened, confidence started to slip. Foreign governments watched the numbers and wondered how long the United States could honor its promise. The dollar was still the world's reserve currency, but the math behind it no longer added up. The stage was set for someone to call America's bluff. February 1965. Charles de Gaulle makes a bold move. France begins exchanging its US dollar reserves for gold, loading pallets of bills onto planes bound for New York. One by one, other nations follow. In March 1968, the London Gold Pool, America's last line of defense, collapses after central banks sell off more than 3,000 tons just to keep the price at $35 an ounce. The world's faith in the dollar is starting to crack. By May 1971, West Germany refuses to buy any more US dollars, stepping away from the system completely. The dominoes keep falling. On August 5, 1971, Congress issues a warning: the dollar must be devalued. 4 days later, Switzerland abandons the dollar peg, choosing to protect its own reserves. Then, on August 11th, the Bank of England cables Washington with a simple but devastating request: $3 billion in gold to be shipped from Fort Knox and the New York Fed. The British, who helped invent the system, are now demanding their share before the vaults run dry. Inside the Treasury, panic sets in. Gold reserves have plunged to barely 10,000 metric tons. less than half of what America once held. Every day, diplomats and bankers send urgent cables, each one a reminder that the promise behind the dollar is unraveling. Paul Volcker, then the Treasury's Undersecretary for International Affairs, later summed it up. If the British, who had founded the system with us, were going to take gold for their dollars, it was clear the game was indeed over. The run on gold is no longer a threat. It is a fact. The world is calling America's bluff, and the clock is ticking. Behind the gates of Camp David, President Nixon gathered his inner circle for a weekend that would rewrite the rules of global finance. John Connally, the Treasury Secretary, pressed for bold action. Federal Reserve Chairman Arthur Burns, wary of political fallout, argued for caution. The numbers on the table left little room for debate. Gold reserves had dropped to 10,000 metric tons, inflation was running at 5.84%, and unemployment had climbed to 6.1%. Every hour, new cables arrived from foreign capitals demanding gold. The pressure was relentless. Nixon listened as Connally laid out a plan: close the gold window, freeze wages and prices for 90 days, and slap a 10% surcharge on all imports. Burns hesitated, but the president was already convinced. The risk of waiting was too great. By Sunday afternoon, the decision was sealed. Not a word leaked to the outside world. At 9 p.m., Nixon interrupted America's favorite TV show Bonanza with an unscheduled address. He blamed international money speculators for the crisis and assured viewers, "If you are among the overwhelming majority of Americans who buy American-made products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today." In that moment, the promise of gold backing was gone. The next morning, the Dow Jones Industrial Average surged 33 points, a record. The New York Times called it a display of presidential boldness. Nixon's gamble paid off at the polls too. In 1972, he swept to re-election in a landslide, but the world's monetary order had been broken, and nothing would ever be the same. December 1971, finance ministers from the world's leading economies gathered at the Smithsonian Institution, hoping to patch up the broken system. They agreed to raise the official gold price from $35 an ounce to $38 an ounce, and they allowed currencies to fluctuate within narrow bands. On paper, this compromise looked like a lifeline. In reality, it was a stopgap. Within months, the same pressures returned. By March 1973, the dollar was no longer pegged to gold at all. Exchange rates began to float freely, and the last link between money and metal snapped for good. Diplomatic cables from that winter are filled with frustration and resignation, leaders admitting privately that the old promise could not be restored. The era of fixed values ended not with a bang, but with a quiet surrender. The age of fiat money had begun. The promise of gold-backed money vanished overnight, replaced by something new: fiat currency. From that day forward, every dollar in circulation was backed not by gold, but by government decree. Worth whatever the authorities said it was worth. The results hit hard. Over the next decade, the dollar lost about a third of its value as prices soared and paychecks shrank. The 1973 to 1975 recession brought a rare kind of misery: stagflation, rising prices, and rising unemployment at the same time. The Federal Reserve now had a new kind of power, able to create money in unlimited amounts through policies like quantitative easing. National debt exploded, climbing from $400 billion in 1971 to over $35 trillion today. And behind it all sits a legal precedent with teeth: Executive Order 6102, signed in 1933, which once made it a crime for Americans to own gold. It is proof that in a crisis, the government can still seize what it wants. Every dollar now rests on trust, not gold. With United States debt surpassing $35 trillion, the system Nixon created still shapes every crisis and bailout. The real question is this: how long can a promise with no anchor endure? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This story isn't over yet.